everybody. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
My name is James.
First drafts.
Yes, and for the benefit of the YouTube viewers, can you clarify that we do change our clothes?
I was going to say, you know what, I should have taken my jumper off just so people don't think that we wear the same clothes or have been here in the studio for a full 24 hours. Slightly pre-recorded, but truth be told, not a lot's going to change in the next 24 hours. Even if Flynn Downs signs for West Ham, I don't think he's going to make it into my draft, mate.
No, I don't suppose he will, mate, no.
So, we're going to go through first drafts, but not just your team, my team, but permutations, variations, combinations. And that big asterisk is obviously that the season is 4 weeks away. So much is going to happen in terms of changes and transfers and what have you. But you can learn a bit from tinkering, because I think emotionally, when you look at your squad, there are certain players in there that when you go to hit the little X to transfer out, you're like, nah, I don't want to get rid of them. And you feel like, okay, so they're locked. And there's others that you're like, whatever. And I think that's how I felt about my squad on the whole when I've been putting it together. Because I think it's a good place to start is mine. And then we're going to run through...
Don't start there.
Okay. I thought you were going to run through
No, I was going to say, let's start with the template. What it is now.
My team is template. That's what I feel.
Okay, well, let's start with that. Let's see how far away you are from it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because you kind of gave the impression earlier in the week that like you weren't going to go with Salah and stuff like that.
Well, he's the one that's not template.
If you ain't going with Salah, there's some movement enough.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about Big Seven, is the Magnificent Seven, as you'd have called in yesterday's pod. He's the only one that I'm skipping. So
really,
yeah, I've got 6 of the others.
Okay, so I think what we'll do on this, and it's really worth clarifying, I'm going to come up with a few different drafts to show you things that I've got in my mind at the moment as ideas. I ain't locking shit in. Like, I could show you a draft and I might not have any of the players that are in my team now, honestly. It's so early on, and as I said earlier in the week, I think there are things like player X gets injured, it opens up for player Y, becomes like an auto, and that player's not under consideration for us right now, for example. I mean... where do we stand if Mo Salah is injured going into game 1, for example? We'll go with Sonny. Does that make Diaz a definite? So, it's a long way to go. And nothing, literally nothing, as particularly some of the things I'm going to take you through, nothing is locked in my mind at this stage. I think before we look at that template, in fact, no. Should we go into the template?
Well, the Magnificent, I looked at it, and actually I've confused myself. Is Reece James in the Magnificent Seven?
So the Magnificent Seven, and Gabriel Jesus is in that. But I've called them that because there's 7 of them, and their ownership's all above 40%. So there's the 4 defenders: Trent Alexander-Arnold, João Cancelo, Reece James, Ivan Perisic.
I have 3 of them.
Mo Salah, and up front, Jesus. And Erling Haaland's ownership is frightening right now. 65%, I want to say, Suj, time recording.
Correct.
I mean, that's insane. Which leads to a wider conversation that we're going to have, and I kind of touched on it a little bit yesterday, about template versus non-template, and how brave do you want to be? Because quite honestly... there is a case to say you could just pick the template, and if they're all fit at the start of the season, log out for the next month and crack on with it. Now, again, things are going to change in our mind. But the reason I say that is because the ownership of them 7 is so high. So the template currently that's formed on site is those 7 players. You're generally looking at 4-4-2 system. Doesn't have to be. Of course it doesn't. You can play it your way, and I'm going to show a 5-2-3 option in a little bit. Edward Mendy in goal has got the popularity at the moment, which means double Chelsea. Just what's our thoughts on that, just briefly?
I need to taste it. Like, they've lost Rudiger, they've lost Christensen, they've lost Azpilicueta. I trust Thomas Tuchel to set up a good defensive team, but those are key members that are not in it anymore. I like some of the young'uns coming through, Shalabar and what have you. I think they're decent players and priced well in this game as well. But with Chelsea defensive... from a clean sheet point of view anyway, I need to see it before I dive in with double. If you're buying Chilwell or Reece James, you're getting the attacking returns anyway, so less of a concern for those guys. But if I'm buying in any of the others, I want to see what Chelsea are going to do first.
So the rest of this template team that is made up at the moment of Luis Diaz, who I think we knew was going to be popular as soon as we saw that price. It was one of the standout ones when the prices were released between Friday and Monday. 8 million feels under, but I don't hate it because Trent's under, Robertson's under, Van Dijk's under, Alisson's under. You make a case even Jota and Nunes maybe will be as well. So I don't mind that there's a lot of Liverpool player options and we can only have 3. I mean, it does mean it's difficult to look beyond the idea of starting with 3, but Diaz is very likeable. 8, you agree with that, Suj?
He's in my team at the moment.
Okay, fine.
But then I don't have Salah, so he's the next best option.
Kind of going to be a go-to if you decide to go that way.
Yep.
Bruno Gamero is 6 million.
Very good price.
It seems fair.
Considering what he did at the back end of last season, the talent he is, I'd like to get to Gamerish. I have, at the moment, a 6.5 million player that could easily turn into Gamerish.
Okay. And Neto is 5.5. And I know Neto's causing quite a bit of split at the moment in terms of Wolves were horrendous the last 3 months of the season, basically. If you look at XG data and stuff, you know, their league position should have actually been a lot worse than what it was. And even when they were challenging, the metrics suggested they would have a dip, and they did. I want to say they only scored about 40-ish goals last season or so, considering at one stage we were considering them possible Champions League contenders. That's remarkable. But obviously Neto missed a lot of that season. And it feels like one where it's the perfect marriage of he's got potential. We know he's a good player. They missed him last year. They've got great fixtures. And from the price perspective, he fits in. One thing that's really interesting, we'll leave out the subs at the moment, but basically what you've got is 4 million goalkeeper, 4.5 million midfielder and forward, and a 4 million defender. Who they are at the moment is kind of irrelevant. It's about the 11. What's interesting and what I think is right about the setup of this template at the moment, and it's understandable, might sound simplistic, they're all different prices. In terms of you don't have James and Chilwell haven't made it in this together. Those 4 premium defenders are at 7.5, 7, 6 and 5.5 respectively. That makes it attractive. The midfielders, you've got your premium in Salah, you've got your mid-range Diaz, then you've got your 2 slightly cheaper ones in Guimaraes and Neto, and you've got a premium forward in Haaland and a mid-range forward in Jesus. And of course, what this template really allows you to do quite easily is move to anybody.
Yeah.
There's on that template, and this is why it will stay quite popular, there's no one you can't get to in one move. You want to go Haaland to Kane, you can do it. You want to go Salah to Son, you can do it. Arguably, the only players that you can't get to on this right now would be if Mendy got injured or something, you wanted to go up to one of the 5.5 keepers. And also, it's a little bit prohibitive of 3 players, Jared Bowen, Bruno Fernandes and Raheem Sterling. Because there's that empty space. They're the only players between 8 and 10. Now, of course, you can still get there in one move. It's just that Mo Salah would be your sacrifice. So physically, the only players you can't get to in Game Week 2 in one free transfer are Lloris, Alisson and Ederson based with this team. It's interesting. And it feels sensible. In terms of price bracket for a setup, it feels about right, considering the price of the defensive players. That wouldn't normally be the case. We'd probably more be looking at, Trent, Cancelo, 5, 4.5, 4.0, something like that. Well, the way it's come in, it's completely understandable why those defenders are so popular. Of the 7 that are extremely popular, who do you feel like you're comfortable to go without? And I feel like this is real important opening question.
Reece James.
Yep.
And Mo Salah.
Just why on those 2?
I think Reece James because there are good 4.5 million options that I think are okay. So I think Perisic, Cancelo, Trent, I really want to go with. It's a difficult one with Reece James, but I just think I can go 4.5 there. Salah, because I'm actually quite comfortable with Sonny or KDB being there, and I think Luis Diaz will cover off a fair chunk of Salah's points. And it means I'm comfortable captaining Trent if I needed to, or Luis Diaz. Those are the two. I'm not going without Trent, Cancelo, or Perisic, and I'm not going without Haaland or Jesus at the start. But I am comfortable going out without James and Salah.
Based on what we discussed on a chip strategy pod, do you have any early thoughts at this stage in terms of wildcard?
No.
Do you think you need to?
No.
No, I don't think you need to, and particularly with this template. But what I would say, as I've said most of the week, certainly since the game launched anyway, is with this template, if it bombs, you're going to hemorrhage value quickly, where suddenly, because you know there'll be a 4.5 defender who gets like a goal and assist in game week 1, and suddenly they're up to 4.7, 4.8. If it's someone like, let's say it's a Pereira or a Castagna or something, and you're looking at, Reece James been benched, 1 pointer. Say Reece James is 1 pointer Everton and 1 pointer Tottenham or something, you can see it. That sort of move happening where then the dynamic of the game changes. I think probably more the discussion point, and I'll come on to a bit more detail, is from my perspective, who can't I go without at the moment from the 7?
Yep.
And I would make a case that there's only 2. Cancelo. And the reason Cancelo is there isn't a great alternative within Manchester City to him. So yes, of course, you can go Ruben Diaz, etc. I would prefer to get the fullbacks, as I think ideally most of us would. But yes, you could make a case. Obviously, you go Diaz, Cancelo. It's not a sacrifice I would want to make. I would think, and I'd debate it more, the others, there are alternatives within the same teams of those 4 really popular defenders that you can go against and differentiate with. Jesus' first 2 isn't brilliant. Palace away, Leicester at home. The price is incredible as far as I'm concerned. But I would look at it and think, is he the sort of one I could come back to in 3 or 4 rather than Palace away, Leicester at home? They're not bad, but there are certain other ones where you think, Watkins has got a great first 2. Callum Wilson's got a great opening day and a Midland game week 2. So I don't feel like it's a necessary. Salah, I feel like I wouldn't want to go without, because there are too many weeks where and I've discussed this, if I went with just 1 premium, he's the one who'll cover me from the captaincy perspective, yes.
Yep.
And the more I've thought about this since the game opened, the more I would like to go against. And I'm not saying I won't completely go down this template route, because any one of them 7 players that you go without, as it stands right now, is going to be quite scary. Because we haven't seen ownership numbers like this
at the start of the season ever.
We've had 1 or 2. We've had Trent at 60% near enough, or Salah. Luke Shaw, wasn't it last year, 55% or something or so when the game started. But not a cluster of 7 players like this, all above 40%. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone higher than Haaland pre-season. And I'll add, my pre-season knowledge doesn't go far back, as some of the legendary names have been playing since 2006, 2007. So if that's incorrect, then forgive me. But Haaland at 65%, with Bournemouth at home in game week 2, frightens the life out of me. Mm-hmm. And his price is great. And even if it doesn't work, you've got the easy get out with
Harry
Kane, Ronaldo,
Jamie
depending
Vardy,
on where he
if
might
you really
be,
wanted to.
Jamie Vardy, or you come right down and you could go a Watkins or Wilson and come up to a Son or a KDB, a Sterling, whatever you want to do with it. Tell me about your team, Suj. What have you got?
Well, I'd like to say, look, I've got Trent, Cancelo,
You don't want to
Perisic.
talk through it, do you?
Well, Trent, Cancelo, Perisic, Jesus and Haaland. I feel like I look at them and I don't want to move them on. My midfield, I've tinkered on the screen, so if you're looking at it, you're not gonna. This is not what I would describe to you. My midfield, I went Sonny, Luis Diaz, and Saka. So I've got 2 8 million midfielders. So most of that, the template drops. That third midfielder drops to 6 in Gamerish or 5.5. I like Saka. You could replace with Mount or Kulusevski or whoever, but it's a 12 million and 2 8 millions. And I like Sonny at 12 instead of Salah. And I also like KDB at 12 instead of Salah. Because I think having Luis Diaz and Trent, I can go against Salah. I feel like I want to go against Salah.
Yeah.
So those guys are in there at that price point. And then I just had Ben White as a 4.5, replace him with any 4.5 that you want to. My goalkeeper is David Raya. So I'd be playing Raya in goal. If I was lining up, I'd have Ben White, the 3 defenders that we mentioned, Son.
Ben White's so boring.
Yeah, Son. Call it Johnny, Dunk, whatever you want, a 4.5. My 5th defender will be a 4.0. Let's see. I'd like to go Baby Trent because I think he might have some potential this year.
He means Nico Williams.
Nico Williams. If
who
he
we think is going to one of Fulham or Nottingham Forest, we think.
Luis Diaz, Saka, Son. We'll come back to my 4th playing midfielder. And then Jesus and Haaland up front. I've got Ward-Prowse in there. 6.5 million, 150 points consistently for the last 2 seasons. Shit opening fixtures. So I might move him on and come back to it. But JWP at 6.5, I think is being overlooked because I think he's 150 points a season consistently for the last couple at 6.5. I think it's decent.
Just while you mention it, you reminded me of one thing I wanted to talk about on the chip strategy pod, which I completely forgot to do, was the unlimited transfers, like everyone does, which will obviously begin with the Boxing Day fixtures, game week 17. Listen, we're all going to have Southampton players, by the way. Just so you know that now, on those unlimited transfers, Southampton have a run of Brighton, Fulham, Nottingham Forest, Everton, Aston Villa, Brentford, Wolves, broken by Chelsea, then Leeds and then Leicester. So any Southampton assets doing well, but the start's not great. Now, I know with him, and a lot of people have discussed this with JWP, you put him in, you leave him, he stays there. But isn't he a pick where you're looking at and going, I'm going to use that wild card late? I'd think. I'd want to be set in my mind that I was going to use it late, potentially.
I think with him, I'd probably want to come in around about game week 7. When do their fixtures get a bit better?
So they have a decent 4-game run from game week 6, Saints, Wolves, Brentford, Villa, Everton. And they've got Man City straight after that. And the Liverpool is their final game before the unlimited transfers as well. I mean, their start, they've got Tottenham away, Leicester away, United and Chelsea at home, 4 of their first 5.
Yeah.
It's not great. But I get it. With the set pieces and stuff, it's any game.
He's a set and forget. I just think I want to look at him, and at the end of the season, has he delivered me 150 points for 6.5 million as a kind of dead spot, if you want.
But when you start that season, do you want to sit there and look at James Ward-Prowse away to Tottenham, or would you rather look at Alan St Maximin at home to Nottingham Forest, for example?
No, to be honest. Remind me, what happened last season when Spurs were at your place?
They won 3-2.
And what did he do?
He got 2 assists. And he was extremely good.
To be honest, that sticks in the memory just because those 2 assists were pearlers.
And he scored against us in the home game. And it was an open play goal as well.
So, that's the thing with JWP. Anytime, any place, he can put it on a sixpence.
I get that.
So, I'm kind of he's a warm blanket to wrap around JWP. That's why he's gone in there. I look out for players like that and what's their price, and if I feel it's a decent price as a hold for the whole season.
So okay, let's look at it.
It takes one less decision out of the equation.
Let's look at this a different way then. So have you done the forward chat?
I've got Jesus and Haaland. I can't see beyond.
And what else you got?
A 4.5.
Okay, fine. So your bench would currently be what? 4.5 forward, 4.5 midfielder,
and a 4 million defender.
And a 4 million defender. Okay, yeah, fine, absolutely reasonable. Presumably a 4 million keeper.
Yeah.
Who was the keeper you put in?
As the 4 million?
No, currently as the main
David
one.
Raya.
David Raya, it's fine. For me, he's the standout 4.5. I think for me, it's going to be, as I said on Wednesday, Raya, I think, is the 4.5. Mendy or Ramsdale, 5 million. I've lent towards Mendy at the moment, thinking that I might be wildcarding very early, possibly. Could easily be Aaron Ramsdale, I think, at the 5 millions, or jump up to 1 to 5.5. But I think that's probably unlikely, having tried to put drafts together before doing this. I'd ask you, Suj, you've got quite a template there. So of the 7 template players,
5. You've
got 5. So the missing 2 are what? Reece James and Salah. Ward-Prowse is kind of adding another, I wouldn't say a template player, but if you go with James Ward-Prowse, you're not going to turn around after 2 blanks and get rid of him.
No.
You stick with it, don't you?
Yeah.
Because of his consistency and kind of the anytime nature of his returns. So you're getting rid of certain players.
I'm getting rid of certain decisions.
Surely?
Yeah, I'm basically saying there's only 2 or 3 players that I'm happy to shuffle around. Yeah.
Yeah, but then what about if it bombs? Then you're looking at the wild card, aren't you? Okay, no, that's fine. I don't hate it. Listen, I'm not going to hate anything at this stage, by the way, unless I see obvious. I think he's going to start, and I don't think he is kind of things. In your first 11 anyway, sub's not so important. I looked at a potential setup for a game week 3 wildcard and what that might look at. Actually, one thing just to come back on for your team, so there's 2 Liverpool.
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah. Because the one thing I would say is, like, Salah's not a certainty for me. I feel like he's the player I need the most from a captaincy perspective. And I think that should centre around my choice. But it would possibly come down to a little bit like what you said. Would I be happy to captain Trent or Diaz? I think for me, if I was to go without Salah, I would definitely have Robertson.
As well?
Yeah. I'd want 3 Liverpool players, mate. Absolutely. Great run of fixtures to start the season. And we've spoken about it, there's 6-7 good options for Liverpool this year, whereas normally, and we'll speak about it with Dan Lord on Correspondent Week, but normally I'm looking at it, normally the debate is something like Jota versus Robertson, mate.
Yep.
We can even talk about Alisson this year, potentially as an idea. So I looked at a team as potentially setting up for a wild card game week 3. Now, for me, going down that route, I think it's treble Liverpool, treble City. But what this opens up, the idea of doing this, is I think you can bin off a few. So, Perisic, first game against Southampton. We've already mentioned it with Ward-Prowse, right? Fancy Tottenham for a clean sheet game week 1? Debatable, isn't it? With the way Southampton play.
Yeah, you have gotten better, but, it just takes 1 goal to wipe that clean sheet out.
See in the corner of my eye, Nico's massively shaking his head about, no, I don't fancy that, James, which is fair enough. And then obviously we go to Chelsea game week 2.
Yeah.
So there's a case to leave Perisic out there if you're insistent on having him, if you're thinking of going early. This is we're trying to break away from this template a little bit. Similarly, Chelsea go to Everton and then Tottenham at home. Now, of course, that could be back-to-back 12-pointers for Reece James. Of course it could, for example. They've lost their last 4 visits to Goodison Park.
Well, I mean, but look at the fixture last season. They battered them, and Everton nicked it 1-0. They battered them.
But Everton nicked it. Everton aren't probably going to batter Chelsea, are they?
Pulled off 2 or 3 worldy saves, and Chelsea were in that phase where they didn't give a shit. But, yeah, so that... 4 in a row, you can't look beyond that they've lost their last 4.
It's a bogey game, that's what I'm saying.
Difficult game, I get that.
And you know what you're going to get at Goodison opening day? 5:30 kickoff. Good afternoon, good morning, Richarlison. 5:30 kickoff. You're going to get that atmosphere again.
Oh yeah, they'll be well
before. So yeah, absolutely. So it's a potential sticky. It looks great on paper. All I'm saying is, I think if you're just looking at the first 2, you can make a case to say no Chelsea, Everton away, Tottenham at home. So who's great in the first 2? So as we've obviously identified, Leeds. I think it really adds Villa to the mix. And Newcastle have that super game week 1 fixture. A little bit unpredictable because it's a promoted team, but Forest at home does look great. Villa start with Bournemouth away and Everton at home. So if I'm looking at that, I think Bournemouth away, Everton at home for Villa, that's a great 2 to start the season potentially. So I've looked at this and I wanted to look at how this would look anyway, and I think this is kind of, in terms of structure, something to possibly consider. I've looked at a 5-2-3 based on the idea of wildcarding game week 3. And again, I'm not saying I'm doing this by any means. I don't overly love it, but it's a structural idea to consider. 4.5 keeper, make a case for Meslier from the available options. If we're saying Liverpool, City, Leeds, Wolves, Villa, if we're just targeting those 2 game weeks, I think we're looking at Meslier. I want to say Martinez, Sarr, and Pope are all 5.
Sarr definitely is. I think Martinez is, and Pope is, yeah.
It must be.
They're all 5.
Martinez must be 5. Yeah. Pope definitely is.
He is, yeah.
And then obviously not restrict yourself, Addison, Cancelo. So I've looked at 5 at the back. So this is Trent and Robertson and Cancelo.
And Paris. No, you're going against him.
And Reece James, so they're out based on Tottenham and Chelsea's first 2. sticking Matty Cash, Kieran Trippier.
Cash is 5.
And so's Trippier.
I think Trips at 5 is a good price.
There's certain ways around doing this. You could argue in terms of structure, again, trying to keep from different price points. You'd arguably want to go a 5 and a 4.5 or a 5 and a 5.5. 2 midfielders only. Mo Salah, captain. Jack Grealish, named there at the moment. And I will view
call
him
it a 7 million price
viewing
point.
through pre-season, 7 million. Up front, Haaland, because I think, again, if you're just going the first 2 weeks, at the moment, that Bournemouth at home fixture in Game Week 2 is quite scary. And then Watkins and Wilson, both at 7.5. Again, same price is not ideal. But it's also, remember, although Cash and Trippier are probably either or choices, as is Watkins and Wilson an either or choice at the start of the season. If that was set, there is no way that team is getting beyond sort of Game Week 3 at best.
No, you're right.
So it is structured just to look at the first couple of games and target it. And the reason I wanted to look at this is, again, what can we do that's different, that moves away from this obvious template? Now, it looks attractive for the start of the season with those fixtures. I think that team. Of course, one restriction is you've got 3 4.5s on the bench. So you could look at Josh De Silva, Andreas Pereira, +1 will become obvious.
Yep.
And obviously it's a 4.0 goalkeeper. So it's something to consider for the start of the season. What I looked at as well was, what if I wanted to go 4-4-2 and stay close to this real template and go Haaland, Jesus, Salah, Trent, Perisic, Cancelo? The one, interestingly, you've gone without Reece James.
Yeah.
I found it, again, the easiest one
To ditch.
Yeah, which doesn't really make sense. Like all of them, they're all brilliant prices. There's going to be sacrifices where you leave out players who are brilliant prices, and it's not because you don't want them. People say, "Oh, you've got to have this player." It's not that I don't want them. I'm restricted.
Can't afford them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But interestingly, with that, I've got Robertson. And again, it's part the idea of looking at something different. So what can I do that's different here? Well, I think Salah and Diaz are going to land in most teams. Remember, Diaz is part of that template at the moment. Can Robertson outscore Diaz? Well, there's every chance that he will, actually. He's £1 million cheaper, which leaves that open then for another 8 million spot. I think the 8 million midfield spot, you want one. You've got what? You've got Diaz in there, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be the most popular one at the moment. But they're all good, Madison, Kulusevski, Mount, there's someone else.
Saka.
Foden. I feel like it's a really dangerous idea. So say that one with a 5-2-3, it's okay because it's really short term. But where I've set that up with, say, Salah and Grealish as an example, and that could be Harvey Barnes instead as an alternative, whatever. Not being able to get them 8 millions unless you're thinking so short term is so dangerous.
Yeah.
Because one of them is going to break out.
Yeah.
It's almost a certainty, isn't it?
What happens when if we're playing a 3-5-2, 5 decent midfielders, or if you went Son, KDB, Salah, what are we going to call it? Big belly, big in the middle.
Can I be honest
it's
with you?
It's going to be called big belly.
I've looked at 3 premiums and I as in attackers. I forget that.
James is saying that big belly is off the table.
It's brutal. It's honestly bad, in my opinion. I've looked at it, and I looked at even doing it with, say, cutting a bit and going Son, KDB, and not Salah. It looks horrible.
Midfielders is very interesting, though.
Yeah, there's a case to start with 2.
Yeah.
If you can work that around, go something like Salah, Diaz, Kulusevski, another. There are alternative options. So, the way I did this one, trying to stay close to the template but moving away from the lower price ones, was looking at really trying to replace those midfield 3. If I'm going to stay close to the template, where do I want to punch against? Do I want to punch against the most owned, or do I want to punch against the template that's lower owned? Is one way of looking at it. So I looked at trying to move the midfield 3 away from the most popular at the moment, which is Diaz, Gameres, Neto. And there's no saying that's how it'll be when the season starts. Particularly if, say, an Eriksen drops at 6 million, for example, which we don't know now. But that would possibly be a bit of a changer. So what I looked at as alternatives was Foden. Dewsbury Hall was a player I didn't mention on Wednesday's podcast, 5 million. And I think it's probably a little bit of an oversight considering Leicester's start is decent.
Yep.
And I like Johan Visser at 5.5 as an alternative to Neto. Now you're saying, so where's the Guimaraes to Dewsbury Hall money gone? That's Reece James gone to Trent, to Robertson. That's the movement of the money. But that's all it is to difference. So if we put that together, Robertson, Foden, Dewsbury Hall, Visser versus the template of James, Diaz, Guimaraes, Neto, what do we prefer?
Robertson,
Foden, and it could be any eight.
Yeah. I'm going to say Saka because I think he's better.
Fine, then you do it that way. Robertson, Saka, Dewsbury Hall, Visser versus the current template of James, Diaz, Guimaraes, Neto.
It's a tricky one. I feel like it's very similar. The Visser versus Neto, if either don't perform, they're going to irritate you. Saka versus Diaz, that's a real toss of a coin. Luis Diaz is great. Robertson versus Reece James, I think it's tight. I don't think it's that clear, cut and dry. But you are protecting yourself off against value a little bit there.
Yes.
Dewsbury Hall versus Gamero.
I would argue, and this is when we did Content Creator Week last week, what was the big message came from all the guys?
When we did Content Creator Week?
Yeah, last week when we had General on Black Box, Late Riser, Tom Cantle.
They protect value at the start of the season.
No, template. Don't be frightened of it at the start, right? Don't be frightened of the template. And I think the answer to compare those two for is, it's the template. Mm-hmm. The template is better. That's why the template is the template for a reason. It's not because these players are the shit, even though there's a lot of people against, say, Neto, particularly at the moment.
Going with the template, there's two things about it that I like. One is where we talk about this phrase, you can't win FPL in the first few weeks, but you can lose it.
Yeah.
Well, going with the template, you're going to stick with the pack generally. There'll be a 15, 20, 30,000 players that go against it that will really race ahead, but they will get clawed back, in my opinion. And tried and trusted players that are in the template, Trents and Salahs and Cancelos of the world, if they blank for 2 weeks, you can bet your money that they won't in the third. It's the likes of Sunnies of the world and that, where people say, oh, he's blank for 2 or 3 weeks. They don't blank for 4s and 5s and 6s that often. And so holding your nerve, if you go with the template and they blank for a couple of weeks, but you hold your nerve, I bet you by game week 4 and 5, it's kind of leveled itself out.
We know some people copy content creators. They don't copy me and Suj, but some people copy content creators. I think if that template stays strong between now and the start of the season, there will be a lot of teams, and when I say lots, I'm not talking hundreds of thousands, but it won't be one or two. There will be lots of teams that will start with the exact template.
Why don't you set up one with wifey's already got, one for Harry, one for your imaginary cat, one for your imaginary dog?
Just to clarify at this stage that my son is 3.5 and he can log in.
Yeah.
Can't. Yeah, it'll be so popular. This is the game is different. One of the things we always say, and I know like Adam Hobcroft's been a big advocate of this in the past, is understand that no two FPL seasons are the same. Something will be different. So to give you an example in terms of swinging away and some other things I've looked at on drafts, is Trent. Trent is best priced player in the game, in my opinion, 7.5. As soon as you see that, send a tweet out, 7.5, laughing emoji. It's a joke. I might not start with him, Suj. Because of these ownership numbers being so high. Because as well, if I'm looking short term and I'm prepared far more than I was, say, this time last year or the year before, to know that, yeah, I might even wildcard as early as 3 weeks. Can Andy Robertson outscore Trent over 2 game weeks?
He did consistently over the last 10, 12 game weeks of the season.
Well, the answer is yes, isn't it?
Considerable margin.
Now, if I go down that route, it's not me saying I don't want Trent. In fact, no, it would scare the shit out of me. But I'm going with Robertson, Diaz, Salah. If I take that route, aren't I? It's crazy.
You can make the argument for all of these positions. KDB versus Salah, Robertson versus Trent, Chilwell versus James, Kane versus Haaland. Across that whole template, there is an alternative. And someone somewhere will have the balls to go with it. And I wish I did, but I don't think I do. I really wish I could go all in and just say, what's the alternative in each of those? And none of these are a drop-off. And all of these can outscore the incumbent in that ownership. All of them can. If somebody has the cojones to do it and it bangs, they could win FPL off the back of those first 4 weeks where...
This is what I'm thinking.
It's mental, but it really could.
Trent versus Robertson, 0.5 saving. Don't think anybody if Robertson and Trent are the same price and we're not thinking about ownership or anything, majority of us go with Trent. Agreed?
Yeah.
Majority. I mean, clearly Trent's 0.5 more, so clearly already, obviously, the majority have decided they want to pay the extra. Can Robertson, over a short period of time, outscore Trent? And actually, you hit the nail on the head. Over, 10, 12 weeks last season. So can Robertson outscore Trent at the start of this season for 10, 12 weeks? Maybe he can. Maybe he can. And if he does, what's going to happen? Robertson's going to fly in value. Mm-hmm. Can Ben Chilwell outscore Reece James? Absolutely. What was Ben Chilwell's points per game was over 9.
Ridiculous.
With the games he played last year.
Ridiculous.
If he's fit in pre-season, can he outscore Reece James? Yes. I'll just add to that, by the way. We're hearing more and more and more that Chelsea might be going to a back four next year, which doesn't, in my opinion, make either player unattractive. But what I do definitely know is if they end up with a bias down one side of the pitch, they'd rather have Reece James sitting deep than Ben Chilwell, because Chilwell is still very suspect defensively. And it might even be that comes together and it changes as we get towards the start of the season where you go, yeah, Chilwell over James. Yeah. These are two.
The flip side is James might play more as a midfielder or a winger. Well, suddenly you've got OOP.
If they stay with a back three, Reece James might play right-sided centre-back and Ben Chilwell will play wing-back. It wouldn't be the other way round.
No, it definitely wouldn't be the other way around.
So could I go Chilwell over Reece James? Yeah, I think so. That's a popular one in my mind right now, where they're the same price, and if Chilwell shows fitness, I think, yeah, I like that. Robertson over Trent feels a bit more risky, but we've discussed it.
Is Aspie still at Chelsea?
Yes, he is, and I had to double-check that as well. But yes, he is.
Re-signed, or...?
He might still go, but I think they would probably have to get another 3 or 4 defensive players in. I can't see that happen. So I
thought he was out of contract.
He wanted to go.
30th of June.
No, he wanted to go, and it was believed that Chelsea were going to let him go because he's obviously been such a great servant. But with Christensen gone, Rudiger gone, they're not really in a position at the moment to do it. This is what I said. If they buy well, then they potentially will let him go.
Right.
But and the thing is as well, Azpilicueta is not going to kick up a fuss. Like, he's been incredible for them. He's not knocking on the door to say, I'm going to kick up a fuss. He's decided he wants a different challenge, and that's probably because, let's be honest, is he going to play that often next season? It's going to be less, isn't it, the more it goes on? And he probably sees that himself. Anyway, another one. If Tottenham don't buy Jed Spence, or let's say even if Tottenham do buy Jed Spence and Jed Spence comes in at 5 million, can Spence or Doherty compete against Perisic for 0.5 saving? Sure. And you know what I've said already this week about Perisic and that price and what I think he could be, but can you bet against it?
Difficult.
You can. You can, and you can make $1 million saving. And that $1 million saving might mean that Neto becomes Martinelli or something else, for example.
I don't see going against Perisic, to be honest with you.
Right now, neither do I. And I don't want to look at it elsewhere.
I'm looking at Doherty. The problem with Jed Spence is I don't know enough about his game. I haven't watched him play enough. I want to see it.
Conte wing-back is enough, mate.
If he does well, you know how people flocked to Doherty when he did well in that kind of period before he got injured. I think if Jed Spence was to come in and do well in 1 or 2 games, people would swarm to him. I feel like that is the type of player that people go to very quickly, and his price will creep up very quickly as well.
Oh, we said it several times. If Perisic isn't fit at the start of the season and Ryan Sessegnon's sitting there at 4.5, that'll become very popular. Now, admittedly, in that case, obviously, Perisic loses the ownership and it goes somewhere else. And I could probably bet right now that of the Magnificent 7, one of them won't be fit at the start of the season. I could almost bet that to shake it up a little bit. But my point in case there is, there are definitely players you can bet against. Now, I've mentioned previously Diaz versus Cancelo. That's not one that I'm as comfortable making the movement to say, oh, that's where I'll make my $1 million saving or something. Cancelo's one I don't want to do without. And his ownership, what is it at the moment, Suj? I think it's 40-ish. It's not as big as Trent, for example. It's nowhere near. What is it?
85.5.
Yeah, but then look at Trent's. What's Trent's? 60 or something, mate.
Trent is, at the time of recording.
Ridiculous.
He's dropped off a bit. 56.5.
Okay.
A bit, but...
That's me putting Robertson in various teams. Jokes. But yeah.
10.7.
Cancelo, he's probably more likely in my team right now than Trent, unbelievably. Even though I think Trent's the best price player in the game. Actually, no, I'll rephrase that. I think Trent's the worst price player in the game.
This is Andy Robertson's last 4 seasons. 186, 161, where they're a bit off, 181, 213. It's an average of like 185 for 4 seasons in a row, mate.
Yeah, it's great early differential, I think.
So good.
Here's something interesting. If Trent was 8.5, I think he'd be more locked in my team than what he's likely to be currently.
Because there's alternatives.
And I think part of that is I think his ownership being nearer down sort of 20, 30%.
Yeah, that's a fair point, yeah.
That's when you break that down, that's kind of crazy to consider. But I think the part of that is because there's 7 fucking guys with over 40%. That's what's making me think different. Whereas the game opens, you go, we're all having Trent. But it feels like I need to look away somewhere. Partly because of value. Can all 7 of them do well together? Yeah, of course they can. But we know that other players will do well and will be increases. As I said to you earlier in the week, Trent finished at 8.4 last season. If he starts at that ownership, I don't see how it's possible that he finishes the season at 8.4 this time.
Yeah.
Who else can buy him?
Yeah.
The dead teams that disappear. Most active
Robots.
teams will have him. Now, it might be that the closer we get to deadline, that it flips so much where he dips under sort of 50% or so, and I think, do you know what? I can still see the increase in Trent there. I've got to have him. But I'm not sure how much it does. Plus, of course, as the most expensive player, he's a sacrifice, isn't he? He's sacrificial for a lot of people. So I'm not, although I think he's the most incredible price in the game, I can't guarantee you right now I start with Trent. And there is no way I thought I'd be saying that 4 days ago.
Yep.
That's my point. So I've looked at a team to go against some of these, betting against. Now, I've left Perisic in at the moment, because like you at 5.5, I still think...
Yeah, just go with it.
And I've left Cancelo in. And I've left Mo Salah in. And I've left Erling Haaland in. But I've taken out Jesus, because as I said, I think I can go and buy him in Gameweek 3. And I think he could lose value at the start, potentially. And again, I'm not saying I won't start with Jesus, because I do think, again, there's a brilliant, brilliant price at 8 million. And he is going to play number 9 for Arsenal in a majority of games. But then looking now at going Robertson instead of Trent and Chilwell instead of Reece James. Still got Mendy in there as well. So still double Chelsea defence as well. And that will cover something off of Reece James as well. Mo Salah captain. Foden. Now, instead of Visser and Dewsbury Hall, got Visser and Barnes.
I don't like Harvey Barnes
Now,
at 7 million.
that can be Grealish. That
Yeah.
can be somewhere else. And the little sacrifice also to make that happen is looking currently at, say, Callum Wilson instead of Jesus. Bang, game week 1, Forest at home. Could be interesting.
Yeah, I like the squad. Harvey Barnes is one that I don't see myself going to at 7 million. I think he's more of a 6.5.
I think their first 2 home fixtures, Brentford and Southampton, are really nice, and I think they're really well hidden by the Arsenal away game. If you got 10-2-10 out of Barnes, you're well happy, aren't you? You ain't bothered about Arsenal away. If you get something great, it's those 2 home games. And again, if you're looking at having the defensive players, you don't really want to muck about, really, I don't think. You want to make these offensive changes. And if you're sitting there with Salah, Haaland and stuff, someone like Harvey Barnes is not, although he ended up sitting in my team for 7-8 game weeks last year, he would be, even if he started well, right, got it, can I move on in game week 4 or something like that? You'd be consciously aware all the time of moving someone like him on potentially, because the likes of Salah, Haaland, Cancelo, Perisic, Chilwell aren't. You ain't going to change the keeper either.
Yeah. And the thing with, like, if you take a punt, you've got to take a punt somewhere sometimes. The options are huge with Harvey Barnes. Like, a lot of the Arsenal attacking midfielders are less than him. Odegaard, Smith-Rowe, even the new boy Fabio Vieira, JWP that we talked about earlier is less than him. I think that there's a fair few options below him. I mean, if you wanted to go back towards the template, Gamero, you can chuck in. St. Maximin might start the season well. I think this is an overriding comment on all of the pricing. There are so many options that you can move towards, and I suppose it means people can set their drafts quite freely and not overthink it because you have escapes wherever you want.
One of the things I'm going to raise with this in terms of looking at it as well is do not let, and this is going to happen particularly to anybody who's on Twitter, do not let anybody tell you during this pre-season you can't go with player X or go without player X. Don't have it. If you've got a belief in someone, go with it. If you're brave enough, like what Suj said, who's going to be brave enough? If you're brave enough to go against, go against. The problem is, and even I would admit this myself, we play Sky now. Sky, and this might be changing when the game launches today as well, is a very template game where you will have a little bit like what it looks like now in FPL, where you've got 7, 8 popular options. You need to be cautious with your daily captaincies, and you're moving about some of the cheaper players, or you need to find the right enablers to now allow them other 7, 8 to happen, and you jump around the premium subject to fixtures and form, basically. I know exactly what you said. Go against that template. If that template bangs game week 1, I'm in so much trouble. So much trouble. 2 years ago, I was still like 4 million after like 7, 8 game weeks or so. It becomes such a slog. And you can turn it round that early, right? You know, the idea of, you have to be in the top 200k in the first game week. Because I mean, Jamie Piggott, who won it, was like 1.3 million or something game week 1. You know, you don't have to start like a train. Doesn't have to be, but you also don't want to die on your ass. And if you go without, I'm not saying anyone, I wouldn't advise anyone go without all 7, for example. But if you go with only, say, 2 or 3 of them, and they bang, you're in trouble, aren't you? Yeah. And you know it. Unless your differentials match it. So it comes back to who's brave enough to say, right, I believe my differential guys will outscore this template. I believe I'll get more value out of these differentials than the template, etc. And that's what it comes down to, because I want to start with all the popular 7. It's me fighting at looking at alternatives because of the ownership numbers. And I don't know if that's overthinking it, because if they do all bomb, we're all bombing together. So do you just go with it?
Yeah, very tempting as it stands. Time to give a shout out to Correspondent Week, which is not next week, but 3 weeks from now.
Good plug.
Because when we do talk to the correspondents about some of the not the big 6, greedy 6, Super Champions Cup League that you want to start 6, whatever it was called, is where we might find these differentials in and around the fringe of the 7, let's say, that you want to go for. That might be some value. I think there really is going to be a few hidden gems in amongst there that we have talked about. A big shout to the pricing pod from a couple of days ago as well. James highlighted a number of players that are like 4, 4.5 in terms of defenders, and 4.5, 5 midfielders, forwards, that kind of thing. So do have a listen back to that if you haven't already as well. And as we get closer and closer and closer, of course, we'll be kind of crystallising our strategies as well.
One of the other options that I looked at that I'd like to talk about is one premium. I kind of touched on it. Free premium is...
Well, so... Premium.
You can do it, but...
What is your opinion? Like, I always get confused with, are Trent and Cancelo considered premiums?
I would say yes for defenders, but I'm just trying to define it from a price perspective just to the attacking players.
So anything 10 million and above?
The thing is, with this, the way the setup is this season, you wouldn't call Cancelo... Cancelo versus Harvey Barnes sounds ridiculous as a comparison, right? But at the start of this season, there is a choice because of the pricing of the defenders this year, where you're trying to fit them in. I would rather, just for simplicity at the moment, just refer to the attacking players as the premiums. They are premium defenders. without a doubt.
Yeah, so we're talking about Salah, Son, KDB, Haaland, Kane.
Yeah,
Sterling?
Sterling, Fernandes, I would put in there as
The ownership's going to be nothing.
If you're double figures, I think
10 and above.
Correct. So I looked at only having one, and as discussed earlier this week, if you are going with just one, the most sensible option does look to be Mo. What's Mo's ownership at the moment, Suj? It's less than Haaland, isn't it? Remarkably.
Just 59.9.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same as Trent, isn't it?
It's huge.
I don't see it going up much at the moment. But then, because it's captaincy as well, remember, if you're captaining a guy every week, split it. You got 6.5 twice. Mm-hmm. It's a good way to try and think about it. And then it becomes value where... I feel like it's more likely that Salah would go up to like 80% ownership than Trent, for example, because he could become like the perma-captain again. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I think if you're going one premium, and it doesn't have to be Mo Salah, but because of the fixtures and his historical record, it's the safest one to go with. So I'll give you a comparison, Suj. What do you think of this as a comparison? Bowen, Diaz and Vardy.
Versus?
Foden, Haaland and Wilson.
Bowen, Diaz, Vardy.
Yep.
Foden,
Haaland, Wilson.
I'll take Bowen, Diaz and Vardy all day long.
This is interesting, isn't it?
All day long. And I think my thoughts around it are probably personal bias hugely. Haaland versus Vardy. I think Haaland over the course of a season will outscore him, but Vardy's tried and trusted. I've never been big on Phil Foden, even though he played a lot of minutes last year, but I like Bowen, tried and trusted. Vardy, tried and trusted. Diaz, great at the back end last season. So I think I'm going with comfort there with those guys rather than the unknown with the others.
First 7 fixtures. What is interesting about this as well? When we looked on, I think it was Tuesday's podcast, we looked at breakdown of captaincy. We discussed it. If you want to go back and listen to us talk about the premiums in a lot more detail, Tuesday's podcast, season 6, episode 2 is the one. We looked at captaincy basically up until World Cup. We broke it a longer period and a shorter period. We identified that game week 3 was the real week where you could go against, because Salah's got Manchester United away, Haaland's got Newcastle away, the Tottenham guys have got Wolves at home. That's a little bit unknown in terms of Wolves are still decent defensively. I have a sneaky they could be a mess, but they could also be all right. But they're not standout brilliant. If you look at Salah's first 7, Fulham, Palace, Bournemouth, Newcastle at home, Everton, Wolves. I'm absolutely comfortable captaining him in 6 of the 7. That's why I think if you're going with one, it's him.
Yeah.
Now, the third fixture is the one that probably everyone psychologically wants to captain him anyway, which is Manchester United away because of what he did to him in the 2 fixtures last season. But if you were going to go against, and we've said it's that week, game week 3 early on, might be the one. If you want to go with a differential captain, Jamie Vardy has Southampton at home. And it's nice. And again, like I said, I think those first 2 Leicester home fixtures are possibly a little bit hidden. It's 1 game a week. You're not worrying about the rotation. If he's fit, you're not worrying about the rotation at that point of view. And now I've got 2 players in and around that 8 and 8.5. Now, with Bowen, you can make the case to go where the fixtures are bad in the first 6. And I absolutely agree with that. So Bowen could be Kulusevski, for example, Saka, as Suj has said, anyone else at that kind of value. He is definitely the talisman. Of the players in and around that value, he's definitely the talisman. There's no saying that Mason Mount's going to be talisman for Chelsea with Raheem Sterling going in there. Kulusevski is not going to be the Tottenham talisman. There's no guarantee that Saka's going to be Arsenal's talisman if Martinelli improves, and obviously now with Jesus in there and stuff. Jared Bowen will be West Ham's talisman. 200 plus points scored. It's City opening day. He scored twice against them last year, and his ownership's going to be next to nothing. And if it goes wrong, guess what? You can go to any of the other 8 millions.
Yeah.
So I'd like Jared Bowen at the start, because as I said to you on one of the earlier pods this week, if he wasn't playing for West Ham and he's playing for someone else, he's 10 million plus player now.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That was clearer than the other one for you, to look at Bowen, Diaz, Vardy versus the alternative setup I had there with Haaland, Foden, even though they're two City players, and Haaland's potential, and who was the other player I said? So, was it Dewsbury Hall? Callum Wilson, sorry. Callum Wilson.
Forward.
Interesting. You went with that. So one premium. One premium is what will get you around a couple of those really nice £8 million players.
Spreading money. Spreading money. Giving you the opportunity to spread money.
But you also potentially might need to make a
early wild card.
Perisic to Doherty, and yes, you may need to wild card early.
If it hits the fan, you're in trouble. Agreed.
I don't have the answers for this yet. I'll know what I'm doing once I come into the final week of the season and stuff. I'm going to kind of put it to bed now. Look at those different options. Haaland, I'd really like that 4-5-1 setup with just Vardy. And by the way, just to add to that, that's with Breuer as a sub. So you could rotate. We're assuming he will probably get a move to an Everton or someone else. Him as rotatable with, say, Johan Visser at the same price, for example. So you could even drop that down to, if you're really comfortable going with these guys as an 11, you could drop Breuer to a 4.5 forward, and you could put Barnes up to another one of them 8 millions, for example. So what I've done is, by the way, bottom line in terms of the cheap subs preferences at the moment is Olsen at Villa as the 4 million keeper. Part of that is, we spoke about Forster and Ortega and Kelleher earlier in the week.
Don't block yourself.
A little bit, just potentially early on. Possibly the most likely of, he's 100% number 2. They've signed him permanently this summer. Patterson at Everton at the moment. Fixture's not great. And that would be one, obviously I can't put Nico Williams or Nat Phillips in there at the moment because the free Liverpool. Either of them, Joe Rodon you mentioned Eric Bailly, and actually Vestergaard's the most owned at the moment. It's probably historical. But if he did get a loan move to Bournemouth or something, say Bournemouth look at him rather than Nat Phillips, if that's what they decided to do, for example, then he's one that could get added. Midfielder, as I mentioned, Josh De Silva on Wednesday's pod, really like. That can be Andreas Pereira. The 4.5 forwards is shit. It's probably Greenwood or Jordan Archer. One of the two. Archer could well get a loan move. But he might get a look in if he stays.
Good. I think that's it.
I might not go with none of these players. But I think I'm going to lean towards the one premium of Salah.
Yeah, let's wait and see what happens in the final week. There's 1 million players in the game right now. That'll obviously creep up massively, and that might completely skew the ownership numbers. It's us keynos that have got in early. People that are not so keen might not look at teams selected by and that kind of thing. So, yeah, really interested to see how it pans out as the weeks go on, and our opinions will obviously be influenced by correspondent week and stuff like that.
Right now,
as
if
well.
I log into my FPL team, Trent's not in it.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Listeners, I was going to say share your drafts, but don't doesn't matter.
I was going to say, don't do what I do. Play it your way is always the answer, isn't
it? If you've got nothing better to do, then take a screenshot, DM James with thoughts, ?
Do not do that.
Definitely don't do that right now or this early. But stay safe, look after yourselves, and we'll be back at you next week with all of our Patreon content front of house. Stay safe.
Includes money in football. You need to decide on a topic. Myth. New Myth show.
Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Play it your way, please. Cue music, please, man child.